is yours. Welcome to EMS at Sea Level. I am once again joined by the lovely, delightful Eric Miscoll, publisher of EMSNOW. Eric, great to see you again. I was going to say in person, but at least on Zoom. How have you been?
I am good and lovely and delightful. I've been called many things in my life, but that's top of the list. So
That's good.
I'm good, Phil. Good to see you.
Good to see you. So you have undertaken a survey, which I find a bold thing to do. It's always a challenge. There's always a lot of work getting through a survey. Tell me a bit about the survey you've been working on with IPC, predominantly on the North American EMS market.
Right. So yeah, we launched this last year, kind of a basic survey of the North American EMS market. So United States, Canada, and Mexico. And the intent was to identify the companies that are here. You know, I was inspired by Dita and Weiss in Germany and Europe and being able to identify all these companies. You come to the North America, you say, who's here? And we all just kind of guess and speculate, and everybody has partial lists. And so I thought, well, you know, maybe it does a service to the industry to try to, you know, gather some of that data. So we made an initial attempt at it, which is what the report is. It's certainly not all complete, but it's a good first go at it, I think. Mm-hmm. And I will say one of the big driving issues here is, you know, the onshoring, reshoring, if you wish to call it. I think that's definitely real, and we see it coming back. And so I think it's important to know who the players are, not just the big ones. Everybody knows EMS, right? But some of the smaller regional ones. And as we go through, we can highlight some of them.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I think that regionalization thing, the idea of manufacturing in region for region is huge. And yeah, I mentioned that in my column last Friday. But I think understanding the readiness of the US industry, the Mexican industry, the Canadian industry to deal with that is a big part of how that can be driven and what benefits can be derived. So take me through some of the results. Give me a kind of a snapshot of what you've found, and by all means, if you've got slides or whatever.
So I'll skip some of these and get to some of the quick over. You know, let's get what we had. Ultimately, there were 74 companies who we included in the study, and I should make that include. We had more that. We had a lot of duplicate people of different parts, so we had many more, and it took a while to kind of get through this. We had some who were foreign companies who just joined in and added their information, had absolutely nothing in America. So thank you for that, but we had to kind of, you know, scrub them out a little bit too.
Yeah.
So the 74, and I'll talk a little bit about that, and we do have some profiles on some of them that we will share as when we release this. The main qualifier, of course, is that you have to do PCBA as a core service to be considered EMS in this. Also, of those 74, I would say, you know, about 70, most of them were North American based. However, headquartered. There were several who were from outside of North America who had facilities here who participated as well. And the data that we share then is only comes from what reflects only the responses of the people who participated. So some big things, and jump in, stop me wherever you wish here, Phil. You know, I started just asking, you know, what are the services? And of course, PCBA, they'll all say they did because that was the qualifier, right? All 100%. But it's interesting to me that 80% and above that threshold, if you see kind of what are they doing, it's that material purchasing, prototyping, box build, NPI, you know, testing service, all these things. I mean, it speaks to me to a very robust, you know, ecosystem of EMS here that are not just doing PCBA, but they're giving a full suite, the S in EMS, right? The service. They're doing quite a bit. There's an other category, and I'd say a lot of the things in other categories tended to be items that could have been categorized in some of the other general areas, but people chose to highlight them. But a couple that kind of stood out is the metal fabrication and even semiconductor dicing, right? So again, and it speaks.
That's a curious one.
Yeah, and it speaks to the capability. I mean, we have a lot of good capability here, is what it tells us.
Yeah. And I think the materials purchasing part of it is, is huge and hugely important, more so now than ever. But I think, when I look at what customers are looking for when they bring stuff back on shore, I think managing their supply chain and being a manufacturing partner are kind of side by side. You need to be able to do both. They want direct fulfillment quite often. They want the purchasing. If they're going to regionalize stuff, they want to shorten the whole supply chain, not just the part that the EMS is doing. So I think that's very significant.
And and what it really speaks to me, having kind of been studying this industry for 20 years, right, is how the efforts of the EMS industry to expand its suite of services has been successful, right? It used to be they all tried to do this to get better margins and to get in deeper with their customers, and they're successful at doing so, is what this tells me. I did a basic operations overview, and I'll go through some, but I asked people, specifically because I wanted to focus on North America, was how many manufacturing facilities they had in each country, how much manufacturing floor space, and also SMT lines, right? The respondents to kind of identify that as such. And they'll give also in other areas. And I'll just kind of step through some of these, because within this, there's some interesting data, and it's, so here it is. How many manufacturing facilities? You see, well, the vast majority of the people we spoke to were, had facilities in the United States, and Mexico and Canada. And if you see under the other, there were still 76 kind of not outside of North America. And I think what this reflects is, as it says on the slide here, is, we got a lot of US based companies who had facilities in Mexico. That's been the case. And it'll be interesting to track that moving forward, because I think more companies are buying into Mexico, and that more will be happening down there. But also the facilities outside of North America, I think really reflects, we're fortunate to have several tier 1 and tier 2 EMS participants in this. I think that, so the stuff outside of it reflects mainly those larger tier 1, tier 2 players.
And I think when you talk about regionalization, there's a flip side of regionalization that means to be a successful global player, you've got to have a manufacturing footprint in the Americas, in Europe, and in Asia as well, even if it's specifically for customers and for supply in those regions.
Yeah, no, precisely right. The next thing, what we asked about is manufacturing. How much is there? We're just kind of curious, right? And I always like this, because when I was with Charlie Barnhart, we used to size it we had a metric, which was, 1,000 square feet of manufacturing foot space should equate to about $1 million a year in annual revenue. So, you can play with those numbers a little bit to see how big our respondent pool was. So that could be, 52 million in the United States, probably reflected in manufacturing here, at least, right? So what this told me is there is a lot of manufacturing space in North America, right? There's a lot in the United States. And of course, there's more outside of here, right? Well, we knew that, right? That probably reflects those tier 1 China with those mega factories over in Asia. And that is still in a lot of ways, as you and I've discussed over the years on these shows, it's the factory of the world still in China, things done. So it'll be interesting to track this moving forward as well, and see how this might be shifting.
And tracking is what it's all about, Eric. Laying down this kind of baseline and benchmark allows us to see in 12 months time, in 24 months time, whether stuff's shifting back to the US or whether it's shifting into lower cost regions like Mexico. And really understand what those key trends are.
Yeah. And lastly, let me just get through the SMT lines. I was curious, how many you have, right? And again, large, look at that number in the United States, right? We have a lot here. And I think that what's happening in Canada and the USA is probably certainly more of the low volume, high mix type stuff. And, that's one of the items that, as I stop and think about the data and what we had, what does it tell, right? One of the learnings, I don't know that high volume will ever really come back, right? A lot of that went to China, might probably stay there. It'll be curious to see with the geopolitical stuff and sentiments being what they are in various parts of the world, how some of that might migrate. But I think the vast majority will be that low volume, high mix. But then if you think about that, that's so much of what's happening, right? What people are building, most of these OEMs, right? And especially with the customization of products, right? It may, maybe there are fewer lines that are running 24/7, just pumping out the same, right? So.
Yeah, and I think you're right when you look at that change in the manufacturing geography, and it's there's more sentiment than reality at the moment, but I think reality will follow it. If you're manufacturing very, very high volumes with very limited variability, it's easy to manufacture those in a single location and distribute them around the world. And, again, that depends a little bit on the footprint of the product, in terms of how that's done. But there's no doubt that there are some very large OEMs that are telling their manufacturing partners, hey, we're going to be manufacturing in a much more regional way in the future. And if you want to be part of that, your footprint needs to reflect that. So, we're talking to companies that have been told they need to be in the Asian companies that have been told they need to be in the Americas for exactly that reason, or European players that have been told they need to be in the Americas if they're going to fully support their customers globally. So, that's driving trends.
Yeah, and a lot of that was because of the industry sectors, right? We always talked about the 3 C's, I deflected the computer, the consumer, and the communications. That was a lot of the A stuff, right? And I always thought about, we talk about the regional, Mexico is I used to refer to them as the 3 A's. It was automotive, aerospace, and appliances, right? Those were, that was a good area for, and that's changing within Mexico too, but they're still very strong within that area. And this just, we asked kind of what are you in, right? What sectors are you serving here? And it's, the stuff that you would expect. The interesting thing to me within this, Phil, though, is kind of what came in the other category, right? And people, and I saw some of this when we were during my Europe trip in December as well. Agriculture is a growing thing. It's going to start breaking. And these were something that used to fit into industrial. Industrial was it didn't fit me. Throw it in industrial. You can argue it there. Robotics, I find to be a fascinating one. That's just getting bigger, moving forward. We used to keep that in industrial, and some of these there's a blending of the sectors as well, right? We'll see some changes here. Tell you,
there's actually definitely there's changes within, and we'll touch on those in other shows. But we talked about the automotive industry, and as the automotive industry starts to change substantially from internal combustion to EV, that's having an impact on the supply chain. Car companies are reviewing how they work with the different tiers in their supply chain. They're reviewing the regional base of those, and they're fully aware that they're going to be a lot more dependent on the electronics that are in the vehicle. So they're forging closer relationships and closer partnerships, particularly with global players. So there's no doubt that there are some changes there that we'll be able to monitor using these results.
Absolutely agree on the EV. I was thinking of those. If you look at the EMS industry over history, kind of there were these waves, product waves that grew it, right? Computers, then cell phone, the networking stuff, right? I think EV is really the one that's going to hit it now. I think with the adjustment that And you see those EV companies everywhere now, right? They're coming up, and there's such growth potential within that. There'll be failures, but there were in all the other sectors as
of course,
too, right? And the ability to leverage EMS companies who become enablers for them, right? You don't have to invest in that in manufacturing so much. And with all the electronics going on, I'm really starting to think that the EVs, as you're indicating, is that next great growth wave for the EMS.
Yeah, I think it's a real inflection point, and I think, I think it is one of those big opportunities, and I think there are plenty of EMS companies, particularly the middle tier and the larger ones that are recognizing that and are really gearing up, and maybe almost playing a little bit of that ODM role where they have some intellectual property, or they've built some design muscle that's very specific to the automotive sector, so they can support the car makers. So
absolutely. And just interestingly enough, you and I will be doing a show on EVs here in the future.
That's coming up quite shortly, I think next month.
I forget when it's. Now, you talked about the sizing and kind of that group. This just kind of reflects by what percentage of our 74 companies were in which ones. And if you look, over 60% were under 50 million, right? So is this the structure of the North American EMS industry? And again, we were fortunate to have some tier ones, give us some good data. And I think, it might be, but this too will be interesting to track because, there's as you well know, there's a big growth going in that middle. There's that urge to merge and get bigger, right? And size matters more, especially with the purchasing power. And so this will be interesting to watch to see how this will grow. Probably, it'll that big 10 to 50 one will shrink some because that's a good target area for acquisition.
Right? No, I think it's fascinating, and I think we've talked at length about the acquisition side, and I've got a piece coming out, I think, in Fast Company in the next day or so, called Chasing Scale, specifically on that. But I think what's interesting is when you look at some of these companies under $50 million, maybe in that $30 to $50 million sweet spot, they're doing pretty well. They've got some nice gross margins. They've probably got a better net margin than the big players. They're attractive to anybody that's kind of over 200 mil as an acquisition target. So they're looking pretty good at the moment. The challenge they've got is their supply chain that's causing them a lot of stress. So there's a shortage of components, there's a shortage of talent for them to deal with, and that's sucking cash into the business. So there are some challenges, but for me, that's always been quite a nice spot to be in. And if you've got some really strong key accounts and really deep partnerships, and you're producing products that aren't as price sensitive as a smartphone or a laptop, then I think that's an industry that you can have some good success in, particularly in the US market.
Oh, absolutely. And as you know, I mean, other companies, other EMS from other countries are starting to look to the US for acquisition.
Yeah, of course.
Buying up here, and because they've maybe grown up in Asia or Europe and developed, and now they're looking to, as you were indicating before, growing and having that footprint to truly serve that customer base and what their customers are expecting. Right?
Fascinating cultural integration when you have a Asian company wanting to buy a US company, or a European company wanting to buy a US or a Mexican company. These are companies that have grown up in quite a different environment, and when they come together, it's really interesting to see what they recognize within each other that adds value. Because as I look at those different regions and have done for years, you see different qualities. And I visited lots lots of EMS companies in all different parts of the world. And when I look at particularly the North American ones, I think they have a unique agility. They have a innovative spirit that perhaps you don't see elsewhere. They have this strategy of kind of middle management, having quite a lot of control, being able to make decisions on the factory floor, and actually making that work within a much larger environment does have its own challenges. So yeah, I think people have to understand, and surveys like this help you to do that, is what does make the US industry unique. What are the really cool parts about it? What are the parts that make it so attractive? And how do you buy into that without actually spoiling it? It's an interesting challenge. And I think we're in for a really interesting and pivotal decade for the EMS industry.
No, I think that's true. And it's interesting, I'm thinking about what you were just saying there, Phil, about the whole cultural element. If you think back 20 years, the way they did mergers and acquisitions, the buying company just dominated the other one.
Yeah,
right?
You'll be like us, that's it.
Yeah, wasn't necessarily very sensitive to how that whole, how that was going to go down. Nowadays, people and the companies are much more sensitive to that. I think give a lot more. And I think COVID probably reinforced a lot of that with the pandemics, the importance of the people and taking care of the people and making sure you're keeping the people, because, retention and, is a challenge in a post-COVID world still. And so anyway, I like to think we're doing that a lot better these days.
Yeah.
Than years ago.
Yeah. So getting back to the survey, where are we going to be able to see this data? And what's the plan going forward?
Yeah, so what we're going to do, good question to wrap that, is as soon as we do this, the one thing we've been waiting on is that there was a profile. I'll just click on it. Here's a list of some of the companies. Not all of the companies have a profile included. So we had to scrub that. Then what we're doing is we're developing this into a spreadsheet, which has been a bit of a technical challenge to post on the website so people can go in and pull this. So this has been the only hiccup here at the end. We should hopefully have that solved shortly. We're just going to post this. So we're going to make this, it's free to the industry. We're going to post the website. Jennifer, the editor, will make sure that happens. If people who are watching this wish to have a copy and can't find it on the website, please reach out to me directly. I'm sure to get that to you. And, my ask then moving forward is, this reminded me of how frustrating market research is. And but I'd like to try to keep doing this on an annual basis, just to do some trend analysis moving forward in the industry. And I think that's insightful and useful and would be helpful to the industry. So hopefully maybe do this at the end of every year, run a similar survey, and hopefully in the years out, we get more participation as people see what we're doing. So
no, I think it makes sense, and it's great to lay down a benchmark. And I would say to anybody that's an EMS company, take a look at the list of participating companies. If you're not on there, make sure you are next year. It's it's not that hard to fill in a survey and get your data out there. And as this becomes a more significant resource, people will look to it to find their EMS partners and to learn a little bit more about them, as they have with the reports that are put together by DTA Vice and the like overseas. So yeah, I think it's really valuable for the industry. It would be remiss not to mention your partner in this process, IPC. I guess they will be also sharing the data through some of their own channels.
Yes, I believe they will be. So they will have the same, essentially the same slide deck that I'm showing here. I'll share with them the profiles as well, and absolutely they'll do that. And so we thank them for their participation, collaboration in this. And again, they do various other research on the industry, and I want to be very clear that we aren't competing with them. And covering the same ground. So
yeah, no, I think
and,
all data.
and lastly,
Data is valuable.
let me add too, this is free. We're not charging anybody for that. Right. So anybody who's interested in seeing this or wanting, please just, when we post this here, you'll see it posted on the website. Just download it. It's yours to look at and to study. If you have questions about it or have any questions about the industry, you know how to get a hold of me. Just reach out and I'm glad to answer any questions.
Yeah, and it's a great way to meet some fascinating people. I'm sure as you've gone through those companies and bumped into a few C-suite execs, you've built some new relationships, which is hugely valuable. Eric,
Absolutely.
thanks so much for your time. Pleasure to chat.
Thank
Keep
you,
up
sir.
the good work, and we'll talk again soon. Bye-bye for now.
Thank you.